When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers!
Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
A Napa guy knows the only way you'd give a freshly minted driver a brand new car is if he promises to never drive it. Instead, let him grind the gears and knock over the neighbor's mailbox in something a little more suited to his skill level. And with over 400,000 parts and a little Napa know-how, he can safely drive something that's nearly as old as he is. It's not perfect, but it's perfect for him. That's Napa know-how.
Welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, your source for solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, with your host, Scott Speed.
Hello and welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. This is solutions-focused dialogue about race in America. My name is Scott Speed, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, John Costino. This is episode 14 of Race Haven, and today is a very unique show because this is the first show that John is going to be co-hosting with me on a regular basis going forward. And I'm going to take a moment to tell you why I'm so excited about that. But before I do, I want to welcome John to the show. How you doing today, John?
I'm doing wonderful, Scott. And yourself, my friend?
Oh, I am doing great. So happy to have you here. And, John, I was just sharing with our listeners that this is the first show that you are going to be moving forward with me as a co-host and as an official co-host. As our listeners know, you've been on several shows contributing as a guest co-host and a guest. And now we formed together to bring our perspectives to offer our listeners diverse perspectives on an ongoing basis. And I want to take a moment to share with our listeners why I'm so excited about that. Because when I initially came up with this concept of Race Haven, and I was sharing it with my wife, one of the things that I shared with her was that I thought that it was very important, if this is going to be solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, I always felt like it was important to have diverse perspectives, because I don't believe there is one right way or one right perspective on things. I believe in a collective perspective, a collective forming and creating a collective solutions in truth as we go forward and trying to process and heal from the trauma that is the history of our country, especially in reference to the African American and European American relations based on slavery in this country and all of its subsequent factors, or I can't think of the right word, but all the bad things like Jim Crow and, redlining and, just all the various race-based and racist systemic issues that our country has dealt with over the years and continues to still struggle with. And as I continue to process this whole landscape of race in America, I'll always hear two different sides. One, as growing up as an African American, I hear it in an African American perspective because that's the community primarily that I grew up in. And then as I got older and began to develop friendships, relationships with individuals who were European American, and I would start to hear and interact with people from that background, I realized that oftentimes we all want the same things. We just have different ways of communicating it based on our perspective and based on our upbringing. And I wanted to be a facilitator to kind of merge those two worldviews. And we're speaking about solutions-oriented people. Obviously, there's extremists on both ends, but I believe that most people in their heart, literally the large majority of Americans within their heart, want to move past the trauma from our history and collectively go forward and work towards solutions. So I always wanted to present a unified front on this podcast, and that's why I've had diverse guests. But to be able to have someone who can literally listen to or read the same article or listen to the same guests give their perspective, but ask questions from a European American perspective, in addition to me asking questions from my African American perspective, I think that will give so much value to our listeners, and it will just help all of us grow that much faster. So I'm really excited about that. I hope that made sense, and I believe that it will continue to make sense the more you all continue to listen to John and I dialogue and model what that looks like. John, you have any thoughts on that?
I just want to go ahead and, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Scott, as you know, we've known each other for years. I absolutely love when you came up with this concept. I fell in love with it. I thought, wow, this is amazing. I honestly didn't even see myself doing what we're doing right now. Just wanted to support you any way I could, give you a platform, help the outreach to, obviously the European American community, as well as, the people that I've done business with over the years. But the more we talked and the more I listened and paid attention, not just to what you were doing, but to the reactions and the responses that were coming, again, I just fell in love with the concept, and I'm truly honored. I mean it sincerely. I thank you for the opportunity to participate and to contribute, because I echo everything that you said. We are living in such a crazy society right now where people are being polarized and almost mesmerized by the media and by the small minority, very extremist left and right, and there needs to be a voice of reason, and I simply say you are that voice of reason, and I'm excited to be a part of this. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, Scott.
Oh, the pleasure is mine, and I appreciate it, and I'm really excited for our listeners, and I hope that they will appreciate it as well. And it's going to be uncomfortable sometimes. We're going to get into some topics that are going to be uncomfortable for us, for our listeners. Some people aren't going to agree. John and I are not going to agree. But at the end of the day, we're going to dialogue, and we're going to look for the strength in each other's point of views. And ultimately, we're going to work towards creating something that's never been created before, and that is collective truth going forward about how we can all coexist in harmony and in love going forward. So with that being said, let's jump into today's topic, John. So we're going to explore this concept that's been out there, when we talk about in the media. When I say media, I'm speaking about social media as well as news media. And a concept that has been out there in the media has been one that if you hate President Obama, you're a racist, or if you love Donald Trump, you're a bigot or a racist. And that's something I really wanted to talk about because, again, most of the time when people are having these discussions, it's coming from one direction or the other. People tend to get entrenched because, unfortunately, as a country, in our social circles, it's still the large overwhelming majority of social circles are primarily segregated and they're not as integrated. And even some of the social circles that are integrated, what I've learned is that sometimes they have a hard time discussing these various issues. And hopefully our show will be a catalyst for people having these conversations and feeling comfortable doing so and doing so in a constructive way. So with that being said, I want to jump right, to it initially by asking you, John, how do you feel about President Obama?
Well, I'm so glad that we're talking about this because you're bringing up a great issue and a great point. I have made the comment on multiple occasions, and I'll make it right now at the risk knowing of the knee-jerk reaction. But I think President Obama and the presidency that we've experienced the past 8 years has been terrible. And I don't hide from that. I don't avoid that. And I can bring a tremendous amount of documentation to that statement. And as you said, being European American and in the eyes of everyone out there, I'm a white guy. If I say that, it's so easy for the knee-jerk reaction to be, oh, you don't like him because he's a black president. And it has nothing to do with it because if someone were to ask me why, I'd say probably for very similar reasons to why I totally disliked the previous 8 years with George Bush. I think that was a horrendous presidency as well. But no one gets to that. And the reason I bring it up is how do you categorize me then if I disliked these 8 years with President Obama and disliked the previous 8 years with George Bush, what am I then? It has nothing to do with racism, white, black, or anything. They were terrible presidencies that have destroyed the fabric of our country for different reasons, but nonetheless, I don't think anybody's household was any better in either White House presidency. So we polarize each other, we jump to conclusions, we make assumptions, and we try to make it as simple as, oh, it's a white-black thing, when really that's something that we're creating ourselves. That's a long answer to your question, but I think it's been a terrible presidency.
Well, in addition to, so when you say, John, in conversations we've had that you don't like President Obama, you're speaking about his presidency. Do you have any feelings about him as a man? Do you have, what are your feelings about him as a person? Do you have the same feelings?
Well, no, and see, I guess this is where I absolutely will take the credit for separating myself from other people, is in business. And, you know, I've been in business for almost 30 years now. I've learned to separate the two. I couldn't possibly make an intelligent comment about President Obama not having ever met him. All I know is what the media and third party want to say about him. So I couldn't say if he was a great guy or a horrible guy. And that's where I think so many people make mistakes, is they'll say things that they have no ability to document and really no knowledge of. I simply think that his choices as a president and his presidency as a whole has been very bad for me personally and for you personally and for Americans that are trying to exist in this country happily and in harmony. And I, again, say the same thing about the previous 8 years with President Bush. I couldn't speak about the man, but I can tell you the presidency was horrible for you and it was horrible for me.
So you separate completely the man, let's say the imagery of the president, how he represents himself in terms, you hear sometimes people will say, well, he has class, he speaks well, he's a motivator, he provides hope, and all these various things. You'll hear people say they like the way he relates with his family. They it's the way it's perceived. As you said, we don't really know, but just the way it's shown to us, he seems to be a really good family guy. Does any of that come off to you, or do you just totally not even in your mind when it comes to the presidency, none of that's important? Or do you acknowledge some of those things as well in terms of maybe some of his other skill sets?
I will absolutely acknowledge, and I'll preface it by saying again, I have over the years gotten out from underneath the ether of the media. And I'm not saying that in a condescending way, because I absolutely used to fall victim to the headlines and all that stuff as well. But keeping in mind with what we're talking about, yes, I think that he is portrayed in the media as a great guy, as a wonderful family man, as a good human being, trying to do the best he can. So again, when people say I hate him, it's like, how do you hate somebody you don't know? All you know is what we're told and what we're shown. And again, it's the same thing with Trump and any other celebrity, any other athlete. We get what people want us to know about them. And I've just separated from all that.
Well, we'll get to Trump in a second, but I can appreciate that, and I'm going to give you my thought processes on President Obama, and I want you to probe, and ask questions as well if anything sticks out to you, because I've heard, certain statements and you may. It's not something that may have been a part of your social conversation with other European Americans, but there's been a sentiment that out there that, African American people only like President Obama because, he's African American, not necessarily because, of anything else. It's like literally it's just because, we wanted to see an African American person in the White House. So let me speak personally from Scott's perspective, really quick, because, of course, I've heard both sides of that, sentiment. And, for me, when it comes to President Obama, I'll say this because you went to Bush first. When it came to, I guess, my political awakening or awareness, it was during the Bush, presidency. That was the first time I actually voted. Because I was in my early 20s when President Bush was running, and prior to that, I was a teen when Clinton and all those things were happening. So when President Bush came onto the scene, I was just graduating college, I believe, in the early 2000s when it was the first time I voted. And, I was wrapped up into the media push, and especially within the hip hop culture, You had a lot of artists like Puff Daddy. I can just remember distinctively. They had this campaign on MTV that said "Vote or Die." I remember like "Vote or Die." They made it seem like, if President Bush became the president, that it would be the worst thing ever for our country. And for them to juxtapose that against death is just boggles my mind at this level of consciousness. But back then, just looking at everything, I just, decided to vote against, Bush at that time. And as his presidency went along, to be honest, I never really, I didn't pay much attention because politics has never been something that's big on my radar, because I don't personally believe that a president has anything to do with me going out here and getting things done and having success and leading my family. So when President Obama ran, it was kind of a similar thing. This time around, because I was so jaded from, my earlier experiences with the whole vote or die thing, and at that point, I began to develop the feelings that I currently have about politics, which is I'm apolitical, meaning I abstain from politics. In my estimation, politics is divisive, and I personally, I'm about, collaboration and dialogue and all these things to help people come together. So I'm always, against. I tend to stay away from things that don't fit within my core values, and politics is one of them. So when President Obama ran for the first time, and as he began to come onto the scene, I will admit that I became fascinated as he ascended, and we could see that he had an opportunity. And the reason why is absolutely 100% because not only did he have a certain skill set, a certain poise, a certain, leadership capability that attracted me, but also the fact that he was an African-American man that was getting the support of not only African-Americans, but he was getting the support of a large segment of the country from all ethnicities. And that forced me to take notice. And once I took notice and I began to learn more about him, and then also because I love history, of course, the historical implications of it, I definitely got swept up into it. And I voted for President Obama the first time. Literally, my wife had to nudge me. I want to say she really made me, but a part of me was like, okay, I want to be a part of history. This is something that none of my ancestors ever had a chance to do, was vote for an African-American to be president. And for me, I don't apologize for that. I just feel like, again, with understanding historical perspective, which unfortunately a lot of times people want to just separate things and say that, act like we arrived to, 2016 or 2008 in that instance in a bubble. We didn't. Everything has historical implications. And thinking about the historical implications of an African-American being in a position to actually win the presidency of the United States, where at one time it was against the law for that African-American to even learn how to read. Not to mention that African-Americans' ancestors, not necessarily Obama, but because his dad is literally a descendant from Africa, but individuals who are, African-Americans descended of slaves, just didn't even have an opportunity to even be legal and considered a person. So with that being said, it just, for me, yes, it meant a whole lot when, he was elected, and I was very emotional on that night. And so with being invested from a historical standpoint as an African-American, whenever I came across, talking to some of my European-American friends or reading things online, and when they said, I hate President Obama, I'll admit, like initially, the knee-jerk reaction for me is, wow, like, is it because he's African-American? Is it because his ethnicity, like Obama? I'm like every one of these things. I hear these things, and a lot of times, vitriol, and it appears literally hatred for the president that I was hearing on the conservative outlets or other, around the media. It's wow, getting all this. Then when I step back and I really analyze things, and because I have the benefit of having friends, people who truly are friends that I love and that I know love me, that are not African American, that are European American, and I can hear them say it, it sits with me differently, because I know it has nothing to do with his ethnicity, and it has everything to do with their passion for their political position and how they feel about him in terms of, his policies. And I can say the same thing when I hear you say that, and you're an example of that, John. And here's the point I want to make about that. I'm able to have that perspective because I've been fortunate enough to literally have a lot of friends who are different than me. So I'm able to fight back that initial knee-jerk, ingrained reaction that a lot of my peers who are in the African-American community who may not have gotten as diverse of experience or diverse of relationships with European Americans, it's easy to just be entrenched with the polarized view of what the media or certain extreme points of view are in terms of if you don't like the president, if you say you hate Obama, that automatically makes you a racist. It's easy to buy into that, and vice versa. You know, if you're a European American and you don't have many African American friends, and you know your only perspective is, hey, those African Americans over there are only voting for him because he's African American, right? But there's more nuance to that. He's actually qualified. It's not just that he's African. He was African American and qualified. There's been other African Americans who for president, but you know he had a certain presence, and you know I know some would even argue the statement that he's qualified, but you know he got in for a reason. So with that, because enough people felt like he was. So with all those things being said, you know I just felt it was important for me and you to share kind of our thought process on President Obama to show some of that nuance and that complexity that we don't necessarily always get in other forms of media before we start talking about the next individual, which is Donald Trump. But before we get into that, did you want to add anything else, John?
No, I appreciate your perspective. I really do, and I can honestly say that when you were talking about his first presidency, there was an absolute. It wasn't even kind of an undercurrent. There was an absolute message that from the African American community, it was real. And I'm saying this sincerely because if I were African American, I probably would have been leading this charge. It's let's get him elected. Let's get him in there. It's about time. I get that 100%. But where I didn't appreciate it was if I didn't want to vote for him, then I was a racist. And that was really a major tone of that first election. It didn't really exist much when he was being reelected because that was based more now on what did you think of his first 4 years. But that first election, Scott, there was a lot of overwhelming pressure. And see, for me, it's kind of weird, and you know me personally. In business, I've always steered clear of politics, race, religion. It just doesn't belong in business, especially for me in that my business has crossed every different, demographic from gender to race to age. And so for me, it was easy to stay out of that, but I watched it and I heard it from both sides. So I appreciate your perspective. I completely respect it. And I think, sadly, again, it should not be the reason that someone is or is not elected. It shouldn't be based on the color of your skin. It should be based on your qualifications. And I think that's where, a lot of people failed to really take the time or make the effort. That's the sad thing.
Well, what I want to say to that is, I definitely agree that it should be on your qualification. And also, I understand the sentiment and the frustration of some people who may feel like it was, from the African-American community, it was like, let's get him in because it's about time. And I even can imagine that some European Americans felt like there were some European Americans who, I've heard the term white guilt thrown around, that it was like, well, let's get him in there just because, he's African-American and maybe that will help atone for the history and our quote unquote guilt. I've heard that, sentiment thrown around as well. And I think that, while some of that may be a determining factor, I also believe that it would be unfair to say that that was the only factor. One, in terms of the African-American community, it's the African-American and just in sheer numbers don't have enough votes to get anyone into the White House, right? So, and if you look at historically, we've had other African-American individuals who've run in the primaries to try to become the nominee for president. So it's not just that it was an African-American. That's happened before. But Barack Obama, he struck a chord, because of his skill sets. Now, as you and I both know, whether he's qualified or not, that's debatable based on your political philosophies. But just in terms of the ability to show a level of qualifications where people can think that you can lead them, that's impressive. For him to even get to the level he got to is impressive, where he was able to get a large majority of the country to believe that he could be that guy. So with that being said, was there, as an African American, and it's unfair just for me because I am not, politically savvy, but I know just from being someone who's socially savvy and someone who definitely pays attention, that it was more than just, oh, let's get him in because he's African American. It was, this guy has the ingredients that I think would make a good leader. And because he's African American, that's just icing on top of the cake because of all of our historical past. And let me talk, I just want to speak to some of that icing because I believe it's important. For me, as someone who's worked, obviously who grew up in the inner city environment and who's worked with African American kids, not only I was an African American kid, but also have worked with, African American kids, especially underprivileged, underserved, poor African American kids and business communities, and come up with peers in that position. I understand the psychology and the experience of the African American in this country, and the and the psychosis, more importantly. And one of the things that African Americans, not all, but some African Americans, subconsciously, because very few will admit it, but just from me being observant and just going through life, a lot of African Americans suffer from an inferiority complex just based on the fact that our ancestors were literally inferior for many, many years, and they were verbally told they were inferior and treated like they were inferior for so many years, and there were actually laws that said that they were inferior. So therefore, those beliefs and concepts, they pass on generation to generation, and that hopelessness, et cetera, it passes on. And it manifests itself in so many different ways. So for me, as someone who's in the business of empowerment, when I thought about what it could do in terms of empowering African Americans to continue to ascend in the social hierarchy of this country, not only in the eyes of African Americans, but in the eyes of other Americans, in terms of seeing an African American family in the White House, the symbolism of that for the last 8 years is invaluable. And regardless, and this is my opinion, but regardless of your political affiliation and beliefs about policies, et cetera, because no matter who's the president, people hate them. Okay. So in terms of helping our country grow socially, I think seeing an African-American family in that White House for the last 8 years, it helped tremendously. Seeing Michelle Obama take it, do all the initiatives that she's done, the various initiatives that she's done. She's been very active, helping out the military families and the wives, helping out, young people in the community with her gardening and her Get Fit programs. I mean, she's done so much. She's been so active, so visible, not just, for African Americans, but for Americans as a whole. And to, the same for Barack Obama, to see them just the symbolism, and for African American people, especially young people who have a certain, mindset based on some of this historical, stuff that's trickled down in terms of the psychology of being African American, some of this post-traumatic stress. To see that has been so invaluable, and I personally am so grateful that my daughter has grown up for the last 8 years. She's 8 years old. She just turned 8 this year. She's only known an African-American president. And while some people listening to this podcast may not understand what that means for me and my family, I just ask that you put on your empty hat and you just take it in from a social standpoint and realize that everything that we talk about has several layers to it when it comes to, pretty much everything. But in terms of politics and the president, it's not just about the policies. It's also about the social implications. And all of us are going to take something from it. So for me personally, that's why I think it was invaluable. Again, it would be cool if we had someone on here from an African-American perspective who could speak to the politics. But here's what I can tell you about that, and then I'll stop. But I do know several African-American thought leaders who speak against Barack Obama's policies as well. So, it's not, so on that side, it's not just a thing where it's African-Americans only, want it President Obama in the White House because of the things that Scott just said about the social side, there are very critical about him and his policies as well.
You know what, Scott, before we go to the next topic, I want to just kind of interrupt and agree with you on something, because you made a great point that I want to validate, give you from the European-American perspective. We share one thing in common. I have an 8-year-old son who's just about to turn 9. If we really want to have that equality and that harmony in this country, it has to start somewhere. So again, while I will be extremely critical of the presidency and the policies and what I think it's done to the country, I'm in full agreement with you that it was I'll just say necessary, if not it had to happen for him to be able to give that belief and that hope, like you said, to young African-American kids that you can be the president. I know that sounds like a Hallmark Channel, after-school special, but the reality is it didn't exist before that. And so on that point, I 100% agree with you that it was necessary, and it's good that it happened, because if we're going to say, hey, everybody has a fair chance in this world, everybody has that opportunity, well, how could it be? That wasn't a glass ceiling. That was a lead roof. And the bottom line is that is now eradicated. And again, like you said, removing the politics of it, removing the quote-unquote policies, it was just about, hey, this was good to provide hope. And I'm in full agreement with you. I'm not African-American, but I absolutely agree that it had to happen to give that, like you said, that dream and that belief that we all can go out there and achieve anything we want. And hopefully now we can slide back to, the achievement and the qualifications, but somehow at some point, that roof had to be blown off, and I'm glad that it was.
I'm glad that it was blown off as well. And here's what again, we got to move on, and I struggle because I want to, have so many things I can say, but I just want to challenge one thing you just said, because when you said
sure.
hopefully now we can slide back to, I sense that that's like a, and this is where politics comes in, because obviously you don't like him as a politician. So there's some people who will say, I know for a fact there's people who say he's represented himself well as presidents go in terms of the things he's accomplished, and they'll have their the same way you said that, and I'm gonna really cut it off, but I just had to make this point. But the same way you said
sure.
that you can you can pull out facts and statistics about how he has hurt the country. I've read other places where people have shared facts and statistics on how he's helped the country. So I just want to say that when you say go back to the way things were, I know what you mean. That's not a shot.
I don't think he was qualified either. I'm being serious. I don't think Bush was
right.
qualified. That was a legacy presidency. That's what I mean. Going back didn't mean before the black president. It meant getting back to the basics, and that goes back past President Bush as well.
Perfect. So, and I'll just say from my apolitical side, which is just something I find funny about politics, is I just don't think there's ever a there's just always going to be those those polarizing points of view on that, because there's always going to be people who don't like whoever you love. So that's just my thing on how politics, just the whole game. And again, that's not what this podcast is about, but just the whole game, the way politics is played. It always, for me, it's a lose-lose instead of a win-win. But the rest will move on. So the next thing I want to discuss is the inspiration for the segment that we're about to go into on Donald Trump, who's been the most polarizing figure in the media for the last several months since he put his name in the hat for presidency, because of some of the inflammatory statements that he's made. And there was an article recently written this in May that was written in the New York Daily News by Shaun King. And the title of the article is, "If you support Donald Trump after all the racist things he has said, then you are a bigot as well." So I want to get into that into today's dialogue, and I wanted to really really get into the framework of how John and I are going to move forward. We really went a little bit deeper into, President Obama than I initially thought we would. But that's the beauty of, a podcast. We have the freedom to do those things. But if you've listened to the show for a while, you know that I usually like to start off with juxtaposing dialogue versus debate, because I think that is important, because the Race Haven podcast is a dialogue. It's not a debate. And I believe that dialogue is greater than debate, and here's why. Because in debate, there can only be one winner. And in dialogue, participants work together towards collective solutions. When you're talking about society, which, the racial construct, it plays into our societal norms and our societal harmony, the concept of there being a winner or a loser it just doesn't fit, in my estimation. And I think that as Americans, or at least what I like to propose, to kind of put out there, is that we need to be working together towards collective solutions, because even in the way we play our politics and things like that, if there's only one philosophy that wins, one way of living that wins, then so many other people are going to continually feel shut out and feel, disenfranchised. Whereas the whole concept of dialogue is that you have two literally polarized sides working together towards collective solutions and working intentionally towards the middle to create win-wins. You literally give a little, take a little, but ultimately a little bit of everyone's needs are being met versus the whole concept of my way is the right way. And I personally am of the belief that that's the way to true harmony, especially racial harmony, because, we, or as I like to say, I use the word race because that's what's known in society, but I prefer ethnic harmony. And I believe that it's so necessary, because if everyone is feeling like their needs are being met and their concerns are valid, then it creates an environment of harmony where we all can win, we all can be happy, we all can feel safe and secure, instead of it always being this tug of war of my way or your way. So with that being said, we attempt on this podcast to model what that looks like for you. And an example that I like to give every week is just an example to kind of juxtapose the two. I'll give you this one this week. In dialogue, one searches for strengths in all positions. In debate, one searches for weaknesses in other positions. So as I listen to John, and you'll hear us do this, I'm going to listen for the strengths. Even if we don't agree on a point, I'm going to listen for the strength in his point, and vice versa. And you'll see how we're able to ultimately, be able to dialogue about solutions at the end of each segment and at the end of each show. So our framework for authentic dialogue is this. Participants listen with a sense of curiosity and ask questions to uncover the underlying assumptions and beliefs behind someone's statements. Participants are willing to communicate their thoughts openly and honestly while putting aside emotions, defensiveness, and a desire to be right. And finally, participants approach someone who sees a problem differently, not as an adversary, but as a colleague in common pursuit of better solutions. So that's our framework for dialogue. I want to, again, welcome all of you to the dialogue. And John and I are about to really dive into this topic about Donald Trump. So with that being said, the first thing I want to do is give everyone the definition of bigotry, the sociological definition of bigotry, or the sociologist's definition of bigotry. And it means extreme intolerance of another person's beliefs and opinions, particularly racial or religious. The reason I think that's important is because if you're like me, you're curious about, what's the difference between bigotry and racism and prejudice and all these various terms? Well, they all are different in very small ways, and we kind of tend to lump them all together. So I want to make sure that we're very clear on this show that, bigotry is the extreme intolerance of another person's beliefs and opinions, particularly racial or religious. Okay? So within this article I'm going to reference, you're also going to hear the word racist. So I want to give a definition of racism. Racism refers to a host of practices, beliefs, social relations, and phenomena that work to reproduce a racial hierarchy and social structure that yields superiority and privilege for some and discrimination and oppression for others. So again, racism is systemic. Okay, it speaks to systemic issues and social hierarchies. Bigotry and prejudice are ended on the individual level. Okay, so I want to make sure that we are clear about that up front. And now I'm going to jump into the article and kind of so John and I can go back and forth on this a little bit. So in this article, it starts out by sharing that there was a movie director by the name of Rob Reiner, and he was on NBC Morning Joe, and he was asked the question, how in the world did Donald Trump become the presumptive Republican nominee for president of the United States? And Reiner's response was very blunt, and he didn't mince any words when he stated, there are a lot of people who are racist. So and this is coming from the article that Shaun King wrote, and he basically wrote how the host they went on to defend Donald Trump, and they interjected and moaned and challenged Reiner, and basically he said they did everything to call him an idiot. But Shaun King's position was that people who have not been the direct target of Donald's offensive bigotry seem to be fully prepared to give him and his fervent supporters a pass. So, John, what do you think about, before I give my thoughts on, what are your thoughts on those statements in terms of what Reiner had to say, there are a lot of people who are racist, and what Shaun King said in terms of people who have been a direct target of his offensive bigotry seem to be fully prepared to give him and his supporters a pass?
Well, again, and I appreciate the context. I have come to know, not even wonder anymore, that there are just far too many people that are in the Hollywood world, sports world. We have put them up on pedestals, and they have gone out there and basically begun to create this mind programming. And I say that very sincerely. I'm not saying I do or don't support specific issues. I'm saying that we as a society have been controlled by these people. Now, Rob Reiner, does he make good movies? Great. Should he be spewing these types of statements? I don't know, because, again, we're now going to be influenced by somebody. You know, I've joked about Brad Pitt and Sean Penn and, you know, different people. It's like, you're not qualified to speak for the masses, but the masses are too stupid to understand that. And because they like your movies or your music or your whatever, they're influenced. So my statement to your question is, it doesn't affect me at all, because I've become so numb to the nonsense that comes out of our media. And I'm being sincere when I say it. People go, Fox News is this, and I'm like, really? But you think the rest of it's not also? Like, you got to understand, we're all being divided. I've said this, you know this. I've said this in business for 3 decades. Stop listening to other people. And my proof to it has always been the same. If you walked into a voting booth and you didn't know who was Republican and who was Democrat, people wouldn't know what the heck to do. They don't understand. I shouldn't say anyone. 99.9% of the people don't understand platforms and issues. They vote by the color red or blue, or Democrat or Republican, and they don't think for themselves. They choose not to think. I've witnessed it in so many areas. So my comment is, if I were to say I'm voting for Donald Trump, that automatically makes me a racist because of him, and that's why I can say his message is BS, because I'm not racist, I'm not bigoted, I'm not prejudiced, and that doesn't mean I should or shouldn't vote for Obama, or I should or shouldn't vote for Hillary, I should or shouldn't vote for Trump. That's the kind of just generalization that polarizes the population and forces good people to make stupid assumptions and jump to conclusions. That's a long answer, but yeah, I think it's a bunch of BS, Scott.
Okay. So with that being said, he goes on to give several examples of Donald Trump's, his case, I guess, making his case, and things that I've noticed as well. So he said that neo-Nazis are volunteering in his campaign offices. Well-known white supremacists are attending his campaign rallies and assaulting people of color. Don Black, the founder of Stormfront, the leading white supremacist website in the world, openly credits Donald Trump for bringing swarms of new traffic to their platform and to white supremacy in general. And white supporters at a Las Vegas Trump rally, while assaulting a peaceful black protester, as he writes, declared they wanted to light that MFer on fire, which actually happened often well, I don't need to go into that. But and another supporter spit in a Latino protester's face at a Trump rally. And it says that he goes on to say those things aren't happening at rallies for Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton because people who feel like that aren't going to those events. Racist, xenophobic bigots feel at home with Donald Trump because he made them feel welcome. So regardless of your politics in this instance, John, what do you think about that? And let me, I'll go first this time, and if you have any questions for me, you can.
I was going to say there's definitely a point I want to make. So yes, because please go ahead, and then I'll get back to that.
Yeah, you could jump in, and if you have any questions to clarify anything I have to say, please do. Please ask. So for me personally, I'm troubled by what I just read, and obviously the things I've read or seen in the media. And for me, the media is literally Facebook, because I've never watched the news because it's the same reasons you stated. I figured out a long time ago that as a business owner, the psychology that the news kind of puts you in, it puts you in a mood of looking at everything that's wrong in the world. And as someone who's trying to progress and live the best life possible and wants to keep a positive mindset, the news, I figured out early on, because I had great leaders, and individuals who were out there making things happen, who told me as a young man, the news will hurt that cause, because it'll put you in a position of having fear. A mental position of having fear. So I stopped watching the news a long time ago. Very rarely, every once in a while, I'll tune in just to catch something. But when I say tune in, it's normally like the national news, just to kind of see a perspective or two on something that's major on a network like a CNN, or I'll turn to a Fox just to hear the other side of the same thing if it's something major. Like, for example, when President Obama was running for office, I was glued to the TV. I watched more news in that period than probably my entire life combined, because I was so fascinated with that whole, his ascension. So with that being said,
Scott, let me interject one point real fast.
Sure.
I want you to stay on point, but you made my point right there. I wanted to listen to Fox to hear the other side. That's the proof right there that it's a tug of war. They literally, it's like if you and I just said we're not going to debate a point. You pick a side, I'll pick a side, and we'll just argue the point. That's what the media does. It's just, and I want you to continue, but the whole CNN versus Fox, news is news. An event is an event, but the way people decide to color it and message it is what the problem is all about. So please continue, but that's the whole point. People choose a side. They listen to one, Fox versus CNN, and all of a sudden, we're now separated on something that should be a fact, and it's not. So please continue, but I just needed to say that because that's, for me, one of the biggest problems is the media.
I agree 100% with that last statement. I agree. So, and that's why I 99% of the time don't watch it, because I want to keep my perspective, as balanced and fair as possible. So with that being said, getting back to the whole Trump thing, when I get things that comes through social media, and they'll have like a little short clip, and I'll watch it, and I've seen all these various things that I just mentioned in this article, or obviously, or if I'm reading an article like this, I'll hear about these different instances that's going on at Trump rallies, and I have to say that I am extremely, extremely troubled by the fact that the Republican nominee, the presumptive Republican nominee, is a hotbed for white supremacists, the KKK, et cetera, violence. And that's bad enough, and that's horrible. But let's just say we didn't put those historical tags on what those things mean, and let's just look at it for what it is. I've never seen people getting punched, people getting spit at, people getting, attacked, cursed out for being, at these various events. And I know, well, let me just, I know people will say, well, the protesters they're starting stuff. Regardless, that whole environment, I've never seen it exist. I haven't been on the scene too long, as an adult, in my consciousness as an adult and able to vote and paying attention to politics. But for as long as I've been on the scene, I haven't seen anything like that. Even in other, Republican versus Democrat situations, I've never seen those things before. And the fact that these people feel comfortable at his events, they support him, that's scary to me. And it's very troubling to me. And for me, it's troubling to me that some people are willing to just give that stuff a pass especially the things that he said, and I'll get into that in just a moment, some of the things he's actually said. Now, for this example, I'm going into the people at his rally. So I'll stay there for now. We'll go into what he said next. But what do you have to say about the environment that, he I guess, supports?
Well, again, and this is like I said, I can't comment on Obama because I don't know him personally, and I can't comment on Trump, but I can absolutely, with facts, say this. There's not a doubt in my mind that there is and has been this very strong undercurrent to go out there and create an image, false or not, of who Trump is. And here's my point in saying that. Prior to him getting the election, and again, I watch the news for one reason, to know what everybody's pissed off about. That's all it does for me, is it lets me know why people are so angry. When he was still running and Cruz and Kasich were still in the race, there were comments being made by senior levels of the Republican National Committee. And they point blank said, we'd rather have Hillary in there than Trump. And that let me know something that I've basically understood for a long time but never had proof of, that there really is an inner circle. And it's the inside versus the outside. It's the us versus them. And it's not white-black. It's if you're on the inside of major politics or not. And so what we saw and what we're talking about and what we're going to continue to hear about is a massive movement to keep an outsider out. And what I mean by that is, just think about this for a second. You can go through history. This has nothing to do with President Obama, President Bush. It goes back through history. We have seen senior officials from federal agencies that literally used to be and then became, after their posts in government, senior C-level corporate executives for companies, Monsanto, Heinz, companies that were governed by these agencies to protect the masses. Why? Because it was all payoffs. And I think you are aware of this. So many of these politicians deal with lobbyists. Lobbyists control everything, and then
Right.
they get these sweet jobs after their time in service. They're supposed to be in government serving us in our best interest, but instead they're taking huge payoffs. And the problem is, let me finish one more thing. They can't do that with Trump. He already has $1 billion, so he's not going to be swayed by a $5 million a year job after his presidency. They have a very real fear of that, Scott, and that's where I think a lot of this craziness is coming from, because they know he's going to upset the apple cart. That's honestly why I feel they're planting a lot of stuff to create this more divisive nature.
So you don't think?
And I'm not defending.
Let me say this. You don't think that because everything you just said in terms of the politics, that's all real. We all know that, and that's horrible. And that's another reason why I am apolitical. But at the heart of this last point is the fact that all of these, basically people who are bigots, they come out to his rallies, they support his rallies. People like the Grand Wizard of the KKK, there's links in this article to what he had to say about Trump. Like, all of these people, it's not, people that are being planted. Hold on, let me finish this point. These aren't people that are being planted at rallies to punch people in the face. These are David Duke, who we know what his history is, and the current Grand Wizard, and these other white supremacist leaders who are saying that Trump is galvanizing their efforts. Why do you think that is?
Well, again, it speaks to my point, and here's how I'll throw it back. Prior to him running for election, where were all of the quote-unquote racism incidents associated now with Trump? And I'm saying that very prominent African Americans loved and embraced Trump right up until now. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, he's a racist. It's like, no, you are now propagating this BS message. And what I'm trying to get at is, does it mean he doesn't have supporters who are nut jobs? Of course he does. Just like back when President Obama was running for his first election, you know as well as I do, there were an awful lot of instances of black intimidation at different polling areas. I'm not even saying it was wrong, because like I said, if I had been African American, I might have been doing things to get him elected as well. But all I'm saying is you don't pin that on Obama any more than you pin that on Trump. What I'm getting at is there is a feeding frenzy, and when there's a feeding frenzy, weak minds don't exist in the normal. They now react, and we see it all the time. So what you're bringing up is real, but it's the reaction to this mind programming BS that's going on in the media, and it's taking nuggets of truth. Does David Duke support Donald Trump? And if the answer is yes, that doesn't automatically mean everyone who votes for Trump is now racist. That's all I'm trying to say is there's giant leaps being taken. That's all.
Right, and let me say this: you made a good point in the sense that I was thinking the same thing. A lot of prominent African Americans, as well as everyday African American people, had an affection for Donald Trump prior to his running for presidency. It's amazing because I remember when The Apprentice was really big, and different things like that. And again, I don't know Donald Trump, so I can't specifically say he's a racist, and I won't say specifically that he's a racist. Him specifically. Now, what I just said prior to this is that I am troubled by all of these things happening at his rallies, and I'm very troubled by that. Very troubled. Now, if they're planted, I don't know. I don't put anything past politicians and agencies and various factors because I know from things that have been uncovered from the past that things like that do happen. So, with that being said, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that you feel like there's a concerted effort to play this up because obviously for, competitive reasons, but you personally, and I know that's your boy because you're in Jersey, and I'm not going to say I know, I'm making an assumption that you have I'm making an assumption that you may have an affection towards him because of the Jersey connection and his, all the work he's done down in AC, et cetera. But that's not just, again, I don't know if that's you, but like I said, that's been something that people in the Northeast in general had an affection towards Trump, because, of all the things he's done in New York and Atlantic City. So with that being said, with looking for the strength, because this is dialogue, it's not a debate, with looking at the strengths of what you had to say, I will acknowledge that all of those things are very much possible. And while at the same time acknowledging that just because white supremacists do support Trump, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's a racist. Now, here's where I already hear some of our listeners thinking this to themselves. What about when he did not denounce, David Duke's support of him? He was very wishy-washy on that. I don't know if you heard about that. He was very wishy-washy of that. And I want our listeners to understand that I'm not taking a stance either way. I will never call someone a racist because I don't know what's in their heart. Unless I specifically hear them say or do something that's intentionally racist, I'm not going to make that long jump. Now, this is my opinion. I believe that Trump is a politician and that he'll take the support. He's become a politician because, like you say, he's an outsider, and I know a lot of people like that about him, that aspect that you just spoke to about him being an outsider and not, going to fall victim to some of those games. So with that being said, with him seeing himself in a position to win as things got tight, as time went along, I think that he's hesitant to push away any of his supporters, whether they be white supremacists or whether they be, everyday Joes. I think that he's hesitant to push away anybody because, unfortunately, and this is my opinion, unfortunately, he knows that there is still a large segment of this country who are racist and who do still subscribe to, a racist pathology. So with that being said, I feel like Trump understands that, and he's not going to necessarily speak against, because in my estimation, and what I'll say I take issue with, is that he's never come out and denounced in a very strong way this white supremacy support that he gets, and just in general, he's encouraged the violence at his his various rallies and things. And let me just go into some of the statements. He says that, Donald Trump started off his campaign by framing Latinos as criminals and rapists. That's bigoted. This is Shaun King's words. He said that's bigoted.
Donald Trump. Listen, that doesn't make the statements true. It just means it's what he said. So
what Donald Trump said?
No. What Shaun King said. Because again, there was a lot of twisting, and again, This is not me defending Trump. This is me defending the fact that the media twists what they want to twist. Listen,
Okay,
there's going to be
let me get all these.
Take our podcast and take snippets of what we're saying and twist what we're saying.
Oh, sure. But let me get all these statements out. Donald Trump started his campaign off by framing Latinos as criminals and rapists. That's bigoted. Donald Trump said he would ban all Muslims from entering the United States. That's xenophobic and bigoted. Donald Trump tweeted a fake meme created by white supremacists with fake crime stats about African Americans. That's racist. Fortune magazine did a deep and disturbing dive, and there's a hyperlink on how far Trump's online connections to white supremacists go. So if you support Donald Trump after all he has said and done to offend virtually every ethnic group in America, after he has been blatantly gross and bigoted and inhumane, then you are bigoted as well. Now that's King's statements, and I end the quotes there. And so John, go ahead and you can speak to those statements, and then I'll jump back in with my thoughts on them.
Okay, and again, my whole point in saying this is people can twist things. Now, again, this is not about supporting or not supporting Trump, but I'll make this statement. I know plenty of Latinos, Hispanics here in this country that are Americans legally, that are just as upset and offended at illegal immigrants coming here and taking jobs. How does somebody dispute that? Because Trump is a white businessman and he says, I don't want illegal immigrants here because of this, and this. He's racist. And I don't know if you've seen any of these interviews, but then you have Hispanics saying, I'm here. I'm a third-generation Latino here in the U.S. I don't want illegal immigrants crossing the border and stealing jobs and committing crimes and not contributing. See, this is the whole point. Not contributing to the American lifestyle, meaning if you're illegal and you're taking a job from somebody who could have it legitimately, it's not just about the job, it's about the taxation and things of that nature. So we are so backwards in a lot of our thinking because, again, it's been the mind programming and the polarization of it. So when Trump makes that statement, I don't go, oh, he's a racist. I go, I agree. I don't want illegal anybody here doing illegal things. Now, I'm going to flip over away from the immigration and talk about the Muslims.
Well, can I ask you a question about the immigration first?
Sure.
Hold on. Let me ask you a question about the immigration first, and then we'll go to the Muslims. Why did he, with everything you just said, again, if all Americans sat down and had a logical examination of the immigration issue, I think that a lot of Americans would agree that it needs to be examined, et cetera, in the reasons why. I think that people could come together and say, okay, yes, we can examine this. We can examine it. But why did he have to literally, when I heard the replay of it, he said they're raping people and committing crimes. It was such a generalized, absolute statement that he basically stereotyped all illegal immigrants as being racist and criminals. Now, whether he meant it that way or whatever you're saying in terms of
making stupid statements or
failing to communicate. Let me hold on before you jump in. Let me go ahead and I want to make the point fully and then go ahead and reply. So my issue is that if you're going to be someone that's the president, okay, how can you make that? He showed no tact. I guess the best way I'm saying he showed no tact, and we have this issue. Going on in our Race Haven discussion group a lot of times where people say certain things and people say it's not what you say, is how you say it. So for someone who's going to be the leader of our nation and represent us with in front of other leaders of other countries, how can something like that come out of his mouth? And yet so what that says to me, even if what you say is true, that it was a generalization, but underneath of that was all the things that you said, that's fine and good. However, that shows that he's green. It shows he lacks a level of diplomacy. And if you're going to be the leader of our country and you're going on national news for the next 4 years and your State of the Union addresses and you're saying stuff like that, you know what it does? It feeds that undercurrent and that element of xenophobia and racism that exists in a lot of Americans. So whether he meant it that way or not, he needs to step up and figure out how to communicate his complex messages in a better way, because otherwise he's feeding into those people who it's like they're like rabid dogs. They get off on that stuff. And there's an element in our country that is that way. The extremists, the ones that we talk against on this show, he's literally, and that's why these people are following him like crazy, because he's speaking their language. He's literally speaking to the small-minded, intelligent thought processes that exist in some people in terms of their development, in terms of being tolerant and empathetic to various issues and understanding the complexities of these issues. So if that's how he's going to lead, I personally, have an issue with that. And I don't think that that's a good thing.
I agree.
So go ahead.
I'm in agreement with that. And you made a couple of awesome points. Is he green? Hell yeah. Is he prepared? Not at that point. And here's why. That was in the heat of battle. That's when he was being attacked literally by his own party. It wasn't even about the other side at that point. It was about being attacked from all angles, right, wrong, or indifferent. He was in attack mode. He was in defensive attack mode. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is it does not, on any level, make the statement okay, but I think everyone listening, if they're going to be honest, has done or said stupid things in the heat of a passionate argument when they were all fired up. And I think you and I can agree that it happens. I sent you some text messages over the past week based on comments that were being made in the Race Haven blog itself, where I said to him, Scott, I said, I'm just shaking my head and I'm keeping my mouth shut because I don't want to feed into some of these things. But, it's silly to me when people have somebody trying to understand them and trying to be an ally, and instead they get attacked and they force them into an adversarial position. This is a perfect example of it. Trump absolutely was not prepared at that point to be the president, but he wasn't running at that point for the presidency, which is why I'm saying don't take that instance and then assume that's who he is. Take that instance for what it was. He was absolutely pissed, and he was defensive, and he was attacking back. And I'm not making the statement okay. I'm saying I understand why. I think anybody being honest will say we can all point to aspects. And again, this is not me defending Trump, but I'm glad we're using this as an example because it's all about taking snippets of people's, public life and then saying this is who they are. And it's like, no. Does that mean that all Clinton did was cheat on Hillary his whole life? Because we have snippets of it, but people are willing to give him the free pass. Why? Because they wanted to. But we've got plenty of instances, and so my point is we have to choose, do we want to believe that's who he is? And that's where, I'm going to shut up after this last point, that's where I point back to prior to him running for election, who exactly was it that was saying this is the most racist, SOB on our planet? Nobody, including very well-respected and prominent African Americans. So we're now seeing what can happen when you stir the pot hard enough and you turn the heat up high enough. People will start to feel pressure and start to react, and that's what we're watching right here.
So the bottom line that we established on our first segment about President Obama is that if you dislike President Obama as a president, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a racist. Based on, now obviously John and I don't speak for everybody, for our listeners, but based on my relationship with John and other friends of mine that I know who don't like President Obama, including a lot of African Americans, that doesn't necessarily make you a racist. John, are you stating that, I don't know, you've never said, and you don't have to state your political position or who you're supporting at this stage, but in your experience, I hear you saying that people who support Trump, not everyone who supports Trump is a racist, and I appreciate the fact that, you and I both aren't absolutists, and that's why we're doing this, so that we can maybe draw some people in who may listen with certain feelings, but maybe we can help expand their thought processes on the whole point of view. So I understand, I already know without even asking that question in terms of all supporters that support Trump are racist. But I also hear you saying that you don't think that Donald Trump is a racist. So I want to make that clear because I already know that whether you do or you don't believe it all, and I don't think anyone should believe it. If you support the whole concept that if you support Trump, you're a racist is is troubling. And I guess, you know, I haven't said that to this point about that article. I don't like that article because even though Shaun King highlighted everything that he highlighted and everything that I read, I totally disagree that just because you support Donald Trump, that makes you a bigot as well. Because one, it can be argued that Donald Trump is a bigot based on some of his statements, based on the definition of what a bigot is, extreme intolerance. But what John is stating, what I hear you stating from a Trump perspective, is that you think that the way he says things doesn't necessarily mean that he's intolerant of people because of their race or religion. He's intolerant of some of the policies surrounding people who happen to have those races or religions. That's what I hear you saying. Am I correct?
Absolutely, and you said it best. He's a politician, and as a politician, don't ever alienate a group that could possibly help you get elected. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's politics. Okay. And so to close things out, to finish my point, I want to say, and then we're going to talk solution segment for just a couple of minutes, it's just that, you know, again, because of my platform or our platform with Race Haven being about solutions, an article like this does not contribute to solutions because of the tone of the title. It speaks to absolutes, and even his final point that, you know, if you support Donald Trump after all he's said and done, then you're a bigot as well. How can you call someone a bigot? Because my thing is, and John's not my only friend that supports Trump that I know. Like, I have a friend who supports Trump that literally I slept, you know, with him, and him and his wife had a house, and they allowed me to crash with them when I was in transition back in the early 2000s between moving. I crashed with them for several weeks. And I mean, these people, like, we've traveled together. I mean, like, I have some great relationships with people who love Donald Trump. I know they're not racist. So of course I'm going to take offense to that because it's not a true statement. It's not solutions oriented. Where what needs to happen, and let's go ahead and transition into solutions. I'm going to give my solution, and John, you can come back with yours. What needs to happen in a situation like this, and within all these racial issues, I don't know where the platform is, but there has to be a way for people to come together to dialogue in an in-depth way to get to the underlying beliefs and assumptions by asking questions instead of making assumptions. Asking each other, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that way? And I think that if you get to the underlying assumption, let me finish this point. If you get to the underlying assumption, I think that it's like peeling back the onion. You'll eventually get to the truth, the legitimate, authentic truth. And I think if you keep peeling back the layers and you get to the authentic truth, for most people, you'll find that we all truly want the same things. So in terms of Donald Trump, even in the election cycle, here's my solution, because we're talking about politics. My solution would be, instead of the presidential debates, it would be presidential dialogues, right? It would be presidential dialogues where literally people asked each other questions and allowed each other to explain and elaborate and go deeper on the things that they say, as opposed to just the sound bites, because none of us are perfect. Some of us may say things, and I'm not defending Trump either in this, but if going off of what John said, and if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, which I personally, and I hate saying this because I don't really have a strong feeling about politics, but I feel like he's not someone equipped to lead the country, just based on the things I've seen and the way he speaks. I feel like he speaks to the wrong mindsets in America. He doesn't speak to collaboration. He doesn't speak to growth. He doesn't speak to, us coming together. For whatever reason, the way that he communicates is divisive. Whether he means to or not, it's divisive. But here's what I found out from my friends when I had, asked them deep questions. They don't even think about those things. They're more so focused on the things that John's talking about in terms of how he can shake up the establishment because he's not, connected to the politics. He doesn't need their money, et cetera, et cetera. Those are things that get my friends excited about Donald Trump, and I understand that. Now, what I will say, and again, this is just a flaw, and some people may say, oh, well, these things won't happen.
I think that's a flaw in our political system because no one person can speak to the needs of everyone. I think that politics should be more collaborative, as you guys, it's going to be a continual theme because everyone has strengths and weaknesses. There should be someone, because Trump doesn't really acknowledge some of the social things, that's not his strength. He should have someone up there with him who that is their strength, and they can work together as a team. So I think that literally our country should be led by a team of leaders. I don't know how many, and we won't get into that, but these are the thoughts that I have, and maybe we'll do a show on that one day. But those are things that will go in line of solutions for me, is dialogue, and more importantly, if they're not going to have it out there, I think within our communities, within our schools, within our churches, within our cities, we should be having these type of dialogues where we can get to the bottom of it so that I'm not looking at you crazy because we're neighbors and I have a Trump sign in my yard and you have a Bernie Sanders Trump sign or a Hillary sign in your yard, and now we hate each other, whereas we should be able to come together and speak to why we like both and really try to get to know the underlying things that we're concerned about. So for me, the solution is dialogue, and it's really taking time to get to the underlying, reasons behind, what people are saying. John, go ahead and jump in.
I love it. I'll add a couple things to it because I don't dispute or disagree with anything that you said. I will add to it that if it's going to work, not only do we have to have dialogue, but there has to be two elements that people are willing to put out there. One is risk, and the other is being vulnerable and transparent. And what I mean by that is, let's just take the context of this show, Scott, and I'm sitting here with a smile on my face because could you imagine if I asked, you're a businessman, could you imagine if I asked somebody for their business advice, should I get on a radio show and talk about race and politics at the same time? What do you think the advice would be?
Oh, absolutely not.
They'd be like, what are you, nuts? You didn't commit business suicide? So here's my point in saying that. I'm okay with taking the risk of listeners not really understanding or caring about what I'm saying and just, taking the quote-unquote shock value, he's this, he's that, whatever. And I'm willing to be vulnerable because it's bigger than me. And when I say it's bigger than me, this isn't about the political race. We've been using it as a topic, but this isn't about Hillary, Bernie, and Trump. To me, this is about your children and my children, and what are we going to give them? Because we have now watched, I'm 48, I have watched, I believe you have as well, seeing the fabric of our society deteriorate because of the divisiveness. And I've always argued two things, and I'll might as well throw religion in here and make it three, that we have become so polarized in this country, and I want you to answer this honestly if you don't agree with it. But I've always argued, I believe in God, but I don't support specific religions anymore because they become so divisive. And I've always said, just like with political parties, you're born into a family and 99.9% of who you are is programmed into you by your parents and your grandparents and the people that influenced you as a kid. So if you're born into a Democratic household, you're going to be a Democrat unless you way overcome massive obstacles. If you were born into a family that was Catholic, Christian, Jewish, whatever, that's who you're going to be unless you way overcome the obstacles, because that's how our programming is. And then we're taught to go out there and believe that what we do and what we believe is right, and that makes everyone else wrong. So we're constantly in conflict. Where did that come from, Scott? Where did all that come from, and why do we have to continue to propagate it? So for me, I'm in full agreement. Have people at the political level as well as at our levels communicate, A, respectfully, and B, based on the issues and the facts, not with emotions, because everyone, myself included, and if you read my comments on the blog post, I had frustration and I allowed it to seep into one of my posts. And I was then able to say, you know what, I apologize for allowing my frustration to seep in because we're human. And see, that's what we have to do. We have to address the fact that we're human, and as humans, we're flawed. And sometimes our flaws cause us to go out there and do and say things that really don't represent us. And that includes making assumptions about people, making generalizations. And the faster we can acknowledge our own flaws we can then start to say, all right, maybe that was an element of a flaw, not the core of who that person is. And then we can start to understand each other better and keep a healthy respect. Like you said at the beginning, you and I are not going to agree on everything, and I love that fact. And I'm going to end by making this point and kick it back to you. I've learned in business that if I surround myself with people who agree with me, I learn nothing and I go nowhere. So I've actually brought in people on purpose that have polar opposite views of me so that we can have healthy dialogues and that we can get to the best resource for the company, not what I want, because I don't want to be right. I want to be the best company possible, and that only happens by me being stretched past my own views. So applying that right here, I love the fact that we're going to have healthy dialogues. We're going to agree in a lot of areas. We're going to disagree in other areas. But at the end of the day, we're still going to be great friends and have a very healthy mutual respect for each other. If that becomes our model, then one person at a time, maybe we can start to have that positive effect.
Well, man, you made so many great points, John. And man, you know, we're at the end and we're short on time. I want to just highlight. You asked me a question. You said, you know, you hit it on the nail on the head. You know, right before you asked the question, when you said we've all been programmed or indoctrinated with all these different beliefs, and beyond that, we've been programmed and indoctrinated to believe that other people who believe differently are automatically wrong. So we are literally born into this world and programmed for the first X amount of years of our lives before we start thinking for ourselves that the beliefs that our parents download into us based on what was downloaded into them is what we take into the world and we defend. And that is literally the root cause of so many problems in our society. And you asked me the question. You said, why is that, Scott? And I have an answer for you. The answer is, I read a book called Out of Our Minds by Ken Robinson. And for any listener who's interested in learning why and how we think the way we think, you must read Out of Our Minds by Ken Robinson. And I am, as you've learned by listening to this podcast, I am very fascinated with human development and social concepts, and I read a lot. And this is one of those books that really helped me to connect the dots in terms of why we are all, well, let me say this, how we literally are all indoctrinated. Very few of our thoughts are original unless you make the conscious decision to try to understand and actually embrace views and perspectives different than yours. You are living a very minimal, you're experiencing life in a very minimal light. I could say it like that. And the thing is, it's not your fault. I'm not saying that because I'm the same way, but I've chosen to break away from certain things because I've come into this certain knowledge. So I just want to encourage anyone, you know, who's into wanting to learn and expand their thought processes and understanding why we think the way we do. You know, why do we, you know, kind of have all these entrenched belief systems and et cetera, et cetera. The book Out of Our Minds does a great job, even though, and Ken Robinson is an educational specialist, so it has a lot of education tones to it, but he really goes into the literally just the way our brains are wired and where it started, and especially in America, and the influences in religion. Let me just say that religion and ancient religions have a strong, as we all know, have a strong influence, and cultures have a strong influence on our beliefs and values. So with that being said, John, your solutions segment was awesome. You hit the nail on the head. I hope that our listeners got a lot from that. That's our time for today. I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for endeavoring on this journey. This is not an easy conversation to have. I want to thank our listeners for listening. It's not an easy conversation or dialogue to listen to and to process. You know, it can be heavy. So for those of you who are choosing to go on this journey with us, thank you. John, why don't you tell our listeners how they can connect with you?
Well, people can connect with me on Facebook. I have a personal Facebook page, John Costino. Please feel free to email me at my personal email, which is johncostino@yahoo.com. And I'd love to hear feedback. Again, it's not about trying to convince anybody of anything. I really am here to learn and understand, and that's why I love speaking with you, Scott, because I always take away things from different perspectives that help me to be a better me for everyone else. So I mean that sincerely. I look forward to all the comments, and I appreciate being here and look forward to our next call. This was a lot of fun. I think hopefully everybody got away from the polarization of the politics and heard you and I having a healthy dialogue.
I hope so, too. So for our listeners, I want to ask you to be sure to subscribe to the Race Haven Radio Show. The Race Haven Podcast. We used to call ourselves the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, but now we're just the Race Haven Podcast. So be sure to look for the Race Haven Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher Radio so that you never miss the dialogue. You can subscribe and you'll be notified whenever a new episode is uploaded. And if you love the show, please leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher apps. This will help us grow the show and gain more visibility and listeners. And as John just stated, we want to hear from you. So please visit Race Haven Podcast on Facebook. I just created a new page as of today. So there's two places that you can interact with us on Facebook. There's the Race Haven Podcast fan page where every episode is uploaded, and you can like and leave comments under every episode for John and I, as well as our other guests when they come onto the show. And if you would like to roll your sleeves up and dive into some of this dialogue that we have online, you can join our private Facebook group called Race Haven Community Dialogue. So that's a private group that you just have to, ask to join, and we'll let you come in and, just bring your best. And just know that, sometimes it gets rough in there, but we're doing the hard work so that we can move our country forward for our children and our grandchildren. So with that being said, if today's episode resonated with you, please share the podcast link on social media and with your friends. Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring their race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences to engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to transcend race in America. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Peace.
This episode of Race Haven was sponsored by Premium Outsource Apps. Do you have an idea for the next big web or mobile app, but you don't have coding skills? Are you a business owner that is looking to elevate your brand by creating a mobile app for your customers? Premium Outsource Apps offers superior apps at superior prices by combining a team of American-based project managers with talented and experienced engineers from overseas. Visit premiumoutsourceapps.com today to learn about our 50% less guarantee.
Thanks for listening to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. Be sure to visit www.racehavenblog.com to comment and learn more.
Most of us like to be out in the sun. That's why sunscreen and other safety measures are key to protecting your skin from aging and cancer. The FDA recommends using a sunscreen with an SPF of 15 or higher. Also, look for broad spectrum on the label. That means both harmful ultraviolet A and B rays are blocked. Remember, SPF plus broad spectrum equal healthy fun in the sun. Visit www.fda.gov/sunscreen for more information. A message from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration.
Good morning. Welcome to Burger King.
I'm looking at this enormous burrito, and man, it's big. I take it that. Dang. Give me one of them enormouses. Enormouses. Watch out. Let's do it now.
Okay, I think I know what you're ordering.
Get the new Eggnormous Burrito now only at Burger King. A hearty breakfast burrito packed with sausage and bacon, plus eggs, cheese, and hash browns. Only at Burger King at participating restaurants.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers! Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figured out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.
When we go out to eat, we never agree on where to go.
I want burgers. Pizza.
Tacos it is.
The one thing we do agree on is we all want unlimited high-speed data. That's why we switched to Metro PCS.
Stop by Metro PCS with the whole family and get 4 lines with unlimited LTE data for just $100, period. Metro PCS. Wireless. Figure it out.
Coverage not available in some areas. Offers require port and of number not currently active on T-Mobile network. During congestion, the fraction of customers using more than 35 gigs per month may notice reduced speeds. Video streams at up to 40p. No tethering. See store for details and terms and conditions.